The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Maya wiped down the last table in her section. Her feet were already aching, but Friday nights at Bellacino's meant the real rush was just beginning. She tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear and checked her reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. Dark circles under her brown eyes told the story of another sleepless night spent worrying about bills. Maya had been working at this upscale Italian restaurant for 3 years now. The money was decent when the tips were good, but lately everything seemed to cost more while her paycheck stayed the same. Her mother's diabetes medication alone ate up half her earnings, and her 17-year-old brother Jake needed new textbooks for his senior year. The scholarship applications were due next month, and without those books, his grades might slip. She straightened her black apron and smiled at Tony, the head waiter who was rushing past with a tray of appetizers. Tony had been like a father figure to her since she started working here. He knew her situation and always tried to give her the best tables when he could. "Maya, sweetheart," Tony called out in his thick Brooklyn accent. "I've got table 12 for you tonight. Big party, looks like they've got money to spend." Maya nodded and grabbed her notepad. Table 12 was in the prime spot near the window, with a perfect view of the city lights starting to twinkle as evening fell. She walked over and stopped short when she saw who was sitting there. Everyone in the city knew Victor Rothwell. His face was on billboards and magazine covers. He owned 3 luxury hotels, 2 shopping centers, and half the office buildings downtown. People said he was worth over $100 million, but they also said he was impossible to please. Victor sat at the head of the table, a man in his 50s with silver hair slicked back and an expensive suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. 4 other men in similar suits surrounded him, all looking nervous and checking their phones constantly. These were the kind of people who made million-dollar deals over dinner. Maya took a deep breath and approached the table with her brightest smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Bellacino's. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Victor looked up from his phone with cold gray eyes that seemed to look right through her. "We don't have time for small talk. Bring us the wine list immediately, and make sure you understand that everything needs to be perfect tonight. I'm discussing a very important business deal." "Of course, sir. I'll get that right away." Maya hurried to fetch the wine list, feeling the weight of his stare on her back. When she returned, Victor barely glanced at the leather-bound wine list before pointing at one of the most expensive bottles. The 2015 Barolo. "Make sure it's properly decanted and served at exactly the right temperature. I'll know if it's even 1 degree off." Maya wrote down the order, her hand trembling slightly. That bottle cost more than she made in a week. "Certainly, sir. Would you like to hear about our specials for tonight?" One of the other men, a younger guy with nervous energy, started to speak. "Actually, that sounds—" "No specials," Victor cut him off sharply. "We'll have the lobster thermidor for everyone. And I want the vegetables cooked properly this time. Last week at Romano's they were overcooked. Completely ruined the meal." Maya nodded quickly and headed back to place the order. In the kitchen, she found Giuseppe, the head chef, plating up dishes with his usual precision. "Giuseppe, table 12 wants 5 lobster thermidors. The customer is very particular about everything being perfect." Giuseppe rolled his eyes. "Ah, the difficult ones. Don't worry, Bella. My lobster is always perfect. You just focus on keeping them happy out there." Maya smiled gratefully and went to help the sommelier prepare the wine. She watched carefully as he decanted the deep red liquid, making sure everything was done exactly right. She couldn't afford to mess this up. When she brought the wine to the table, Victor barely acknowledged her presence. He swirled the wine in his glass, sniffed it, and took a small sip. For a moment, Maya held her breath, waiting for his verdict. "Acceptable," he said finally, though his tone suggested it was barely so. The evening continued like this, with Victor finding fault in everything. The bread was too warm, then too cool when they brought a fresh basket. The lighting was too dim, so Maya adjusted it, only to be told it was now too bright. The background music was too loud, then too quiet after she asked the manager to adjust it. Through it all, Maya kept her smile in place and her voice pleasant. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but Victor seemed to be in a league of his own. His business associates looked embarrassed by his behavior, but none of them dared to say anything. When the lobster arrived, Maya held her breath again. Giuseppe had outdone himself. The presentation was beautiful, the aroma was incredible, and she could see the meat was cooked to perfection. Victor cut into his lobster and took a bite. He chewed slowly, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he set down his fork. The sauce is too rich, and the lobster is slightly overcooked. Maya felt her heart sink. She knew Giuseppe's cooking and that lobster was perfect, but she just nodded politely. "I'm so sorry, sir. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare something else?" "No, we don't have time. I'll suffer through it." Victor's voice dripped with disdain. The other men at the table looked uncomfortable. One of them, a kind-faced man with gray hair, caught Maya's eye and mouthed, "Sorry," when Victor wasn't looking. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. As the meal progressed, Maya noticed that Victor seemed to be enjoying himself. Not the food or the service, but the power he had over her. Every complaint, every criticism, seemed designed to test how far he could push her before she broke. But Maya couldn't afford to break. Every time Victor snapped his fingers for more water or complained about something trivial, she thought about her mother counting out pills at the kitchen table, trying to make her medication last longer. She thought about Jake staying up late, studying with borrowed textbooks because they couldn't afford new ones. By the time dessert arrived, Maya's feet were killing her and she had a headache from the stress, but she maintained her professional smile and continued to provide excellent service, despite Victor's constant complaints. The other diners in the restaurant had started to notice the commotion at table 12. Maya could feel their eyes on her, some looking sympathetic, others just curious about the drama unfolding. As Victor finished his espresso, he leaned back in his chair and surveyed the restaurant with the air of someone who owned everything he saw. His eyes landed on something in the corner, and a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just gotten a very bad idea. Maya followed his gaze and felt a chill run down her spine. He was looking at the beautiful black grand piano that sat in the corner of the dining room. It had been there since the restaurant opened, mostly for decoration since their regular pianist had quit months ago. Victor's smile grew wider as he turned back to look at Maya. Something was about to happen, and she had the sinking feeling that her night was about to get much worse. Victor Rothwell set down his espresso cup with a soft clink that somehow managed to sound ominous in the quiet restaurant. The dinner crowd had thinned out, but there were still plenty of people around to witness whatever was about to happen. Maya stood beside the table, waiting to clear the dessert plates when Victor raised his hand to stop her. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying across the dining room. "I have a question for you." Maya felt every pair of eyes in the restaurant turn toward their table. The conversations at nearby tables grew quieter as people sensed drama in the air. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Victor leaned back in his chair, that cruel smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've been working very hard tonight, haven't you? Running back and forth trying to please everyone." Maya nodded cautiously. She could sense this was going somewhere she didn't want it to go, but she had no choice but to play along. "I always try my best to provide excellent service, sir." "Excellent service," Victor repeated, tasting the words. "Yes, you certainly have been trying. But you know what? I think you've been working too hard. You need a break from all that running around." The other men at his table shifted uncomfortably. The kind-faced man with gray hair cleared his throat softly, as if he wanted to say something, but Victor shot him a look that silenced him immediately. "I noticed that beautiful piano over there," Victor continued, gesturing toward the corner with a theatrical flourish. "It's been sitting there all evening, completely silent. Such a shame to see a gorgeous instrument like that going to waste." Maya's stomach dropped. She could see exactly where this was heading, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Yes, sir, it's a lovely piano. The restaurant used to have a pianist, but now it's just sitting there collecting dust," Victor interrupted. "That seems like such a waste, doesn't it, gentlemen?" He looked around at his companions, who nodded reluctantly. "I bet a talented young woman like you must have some musical ability. All young ladies learn piano these days, don't they?" Maya felt her cheeks burn. The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet now. Even the servers had stopped moving, sensing the tension in the air. She could see Tony watching from near the kitchen door. "Hi." His face creased with concern. "Sir, I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm working right now and I really need to—" "Oh, but I insist," Victor said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You see, my friends and I have had a lovely evening, but we're not quite ready for it to end." A little entertainment would be perfect right about now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, thick with cash. Maya couldn't help but notice the stack of $100 bills inside. Her month's rent money was probably just sitting there in his pocket like loose change. Tell you what, Victor continued, pulling out several bills and placing them on the table. $500. All you have to do is walk over to that piano and play us a song. Any song. Even Mary Had a Little Lamb would do. Maya stared at the money on the table. $500. That was more than she made in 2 weeks. That money could pay for her mother's medication for 3 months. It could buy Jake's textbooks and still have enough left over for groceries. But the way Victor was offering it, with that smug expression and that condescending tone, made it clear this wasn't really about music. This was about power. About a rich man amusing himself by making a working-class girl dance for his entertainment. Sir, I'm flattered, but I really can't. Can't? Victor's eyebrow shot up in mock surprise. Oh, I see. You can't play piano. Well, that's perfectly understandable. Not everyone has had the privilege of a proper education. The insult stung even though Maya knew it was intended to manipulate her. Victor was betting that her pride would force her to prove him wrong. The worst part was it was working. I can play? Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, what was that? Victor cupped his ear dramatically. I couldn't quite hear you. I said I can play, Maya repeated louder this time. Several nearby diners turned to look at her with interest. Victor's smile widened. Wonderful. Then what's the problem? $500 for a simple song. That's more than you make in a week, isn't it? Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to cry. Not here. Not in front of all these people. She thought about her mother at home, probably skipping dinner again to save money. She thought about Jake, sitting at the kitchen table with his worn-out textbooks, trying to prepare for college entrance exams with outdated information. The thing is, Victor continued, apparently enjoying every moment of her discomfort, I want to make sure we get our money's worth. So here's what we'll do. If you can play something that actually sounds like music, you keep the $500. But if you embarrass yourself up there, well, he shrugged. Let's just say you'll have learned a valuable lesson about knowing your place. The cruelty of it took Maya's breath away. This wasn't just about humiliating her. It was about doing it in front of a room full of people, making sure she felt as small and powerless as possible. Mr. Castellano, the restaurant manager, appeared at Maya's side. He was a short, stocky man with kind eyes who had always treated his employees fairly. Mr. Rothwell, I don't think this is appropriate. Maya is working and, oh, but she wants to play. Victor cut him off smoothly. Don't you, Maya? You wouldn't want to disappoint all these people who are now expecting a performance. Maya looked around the restaurant. Every face was turned toward her, waiting to see what she would do. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed eager for the drama to unfold. She felt trapped like an animal in a cage with nowhere to run. Maya started, then stopped. Her hands were shaking now, and she clasped them together to try to steady them. Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the quiet room. $500, Maya. Think about what that money could do for you. All you have to do is sit down at that piano and play something. Anything. How hard could it be? Maya closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the stares, trying to think clearly. But all she could see were bills piling up on the kitchen table at home. Her mother's worried face when she thought no one was looking. Jake's disappointment when they had to tell him they couldn't afford the prep course for his college entrance exams. When she opened her eyes, Victor was still smiling at her, waiting for her answer. The money sat on the table between them like a challenge, like a trap, like the answer to all her problems and the source of her worst nightmare rolled into one. Tick-tock. Victor said softly, My friends and I are getting impatient. Are you going to play for us, or are you going to admit that you're not capable of earning this money? Maya looked at the piano again. It was a beautiful instrument, a baby grand with polished black wood that reflected the restaurant's warm lighting. She had always admired it from a distance during her shifts, never imagining she might actually sit down and play it. The silence in the restaurant stretched on. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Maya could hear her grandmother's voice from years ago, patient and encouraging. Music isn't just about the notes, mija. It's about telling your story. And everyone has a story worth telling. Maya took a deep breath and looked directly at Victor Rothwell. All right, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'll play for you. Victor clapped his hands together once, a sharp sound in the quiet room. "Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the restaurant, "we're about to have a little concert. I do hope you'll all stay and listen." Maya walked slowly toward the piano, feeling like she was walking toward her own execution. Behind her, she could hear the scrape of chairs as people turned to get a better view. Her legs felt like lead, and her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the polished wood. She could still back out. She could walk away, keep what was left of her dignity, and figure out another way to pay the bills. But then she heard Victor's voice behind her, loud and mocking. "Oh, I do hope she knows more than chopsticks. That would be rather embarrassing for everyone involved." Maya sat down on the piano bench and lifted the lid, revealing the pristine ivory and ebony keys beneath. She placed her fingers on the keyboard and felt something she hadn't felt in years. The electric connection between herself and an instrument that had once been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. For just a moment, she forgot about Victor Rothwell and his cruel game. She forgot about the watching crowd and the $500 on the table. She remembered what it felt like to make music, to turn emotion into sound, to tell her story without words. Then reality crashed back in. She was about to play piano in front of a room full of strangers, with a millionaire betting that she would fail. Her hands trembled as she tried to decide what to play, knowing that whatever she chose, Victor would probably find fault with it. The restaurant held its breath, waiting for her first note. Maya sat at the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys like she was afraid they might burn her. The restaurant was so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Every eye in the place was on her, waiting for her to either make beautiful music or embarrass herself completely. Behind her, she could hear Victor Rothwell settling back in his chair with satisfaction. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, a show. A working-class girl forced to perform for his entertainment, with the promise of money she desperately needed dangling just out of reach. Maya closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. Her grandmother's old upright piano flashed through her memory. Hours and hours of practice in that tiny apartment, with Grandma Rosa sitting beside her on the worn bench, guiding her small fingers across the keys. "Feel the music, mija," Grandma Rosa used to say. "Don't just play the notes. Tell me a story with your hands." That piano had been sold years ago along with most of their belongings when the medical bills started piling up. Maya hadn't touched a piano in almost 4 years. Her fingers felt stiff and uncertain now, nothing like the confident hands that used to dance across the keys. She opened her eyes and looked down at the pristine keyboard in front of her. This was a far cry from Grandma Rosa's old upright with its chipped keys and slightly off-tuned middle C. This was a real piano, the kind she used to dream of playing someday. "Any time now," Victor called out from behind her, his voice dripping with impatience and barely concealed amusement. "We're all waiting for your performance." Maya's cheeks burned with humiliation. She could hear quiet murmurs from the other diners, probably placing bets on whether she would actually be able to play anything decent. She thought about the simple songs Victor had mentioned, the ones clearly meant to insult her. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Safe, easy pieces that anyone could stumble through. But as her fingers found their position on the keys, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the years of frustration and struggle. Maybe it was the way Victor had looked at her like she was nothing, like she was just another piece of entertainment for his amusement. Maybe it was thinking about her mother at home, rationing her medication to make it last longer. Whatever it was, Maya felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Defiance. She had spent 3 years taking insults from difficult customers. 3 years biting her tongue and forcing smiles when people treated her like she was invisible. 3 years of being polite and grateful and small, but sitting at this piano with all these people watching, something inside her refused to be small anymore. Maya positioned her hands properly and took one more deep breath. Then, instead of the childish song Victor expected, she began to play Chopin's Minute Waltz. The first notes rang out clear and precise, and Maya felt something click into place. It was like riding a bicycle after years of not cycling. Her muscle memory kicked in, and suddenly her fingers remembered exactly where to go. The minute waltz was no beginner's piece. It required speed, precision, and delicate touch. As Maya moved into the flowing melody, she could feel the restaurant's energy change. The quiet murmurs stopped completely. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to fade away. But Maya was just getting started. As the waltz came to an end, she transitioned seamlessly into something more challenging. Debussy's Clair de Lune. Her fingers found the dreamy, floating melody as if no time had passed at all. This was the piece that had gotten her accepted to the music program at the university, back when she thought she might actually have a future as a musician. The music filled the restaurant like water filling a pool, touching every corner, every table, every person. Maya could feel herself getting lost in it, the way she used to when she was younger. The notes weren't just sounds anymore. They were colors and emotions and memories all mixed together. She played with her eyes closed now, not thinking about Victor or the money or the people watching. She was telling her story, just like Grandma Rosa had taught her. The story of a girl who had given up her dreams to take care of her family. The story of working double shifts and counting every penny and still never having enough. The story of staying strong even when everything felt hopeless. Behind her, Victor Rothwell had gone completely silent. The smug smile had disappeared from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like shock. This was not what he had expected. This was not some waitress stumbling through a children's song. This was real music, played by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. As Clair de Lune faded away, Maya opened her eyes and looked out at the restaurant. Every face was turned toward her, but their expressions had completely changed. Instead of curiosity or pity or amusement, she saw something else. Respect. Wonder. Some people had tears in their eyes. But Maya wasn't finished yet. 4 years of silence, 4 years of pushing down her musical dreams, 4 years of pretending that part of herself didn't exist, came pouring out through her fingertips. She moved into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces she had ever learned. Her hands flew across the keys with increasing confidence. The dramatic, thunderous chords filled the restaurant with power and passion. This wasn't gentle background music anymore. This was a force of nature, raw and emotional and absolutely unmistakable. Maya could feel every note in her chest, in her bones, in her soul. This was who she really was, underneath the uniform and the forced smiles and the constant worry about money. This was the part of herself she had buried but never quite killed. The Rachmaninoff built to its crashing climax, and Maya threw everything she had into those final measures. Her hands moved with precision and power, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed impossible. The last chord rang out like thunder, echoing through the restaurant long after her hands had lifted from the keys. For a moment, the silence was complete. Maya sat at the piano bench, breathing hard, her heart pounding from the exertion and emotion of what she had just done. She had played for maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like she had lived an entire lifetime at that keyboard. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then another. Then suddenly, the entire restaurant was on their feet. The sound was overwhelming, a wall of appreciation and amazement that washed over Maya like a warm wave. She turned around to face the room and saw faces she had never seen before, all looking at her like she was some kind of miracle. Near the kitchen, Tony was wiping tears from his eyes. Mr. Castellano stood by the bar with his mouth hanging open in amazement. Even some of the other servers had come out from the back to see what all the commotion was about. But it was Victor Rothwell's face that shocked Maya the most. The arrogant millionaire who had been so sure she would humiliate herself was staring at her with something that looked almost like fear. His face was pale and his hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Maya stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. The applause continued, but she barely heard it. She felt like she was in a dream, or maybe like she had just woken up from a very long sleep. For the first time in years, she remembered what it felt like to be truly alive. She walked back toward Victor's table, past all the applauding diners, past the amazed faces and the whispered comments of incredible and unbelievable. Her legs felt unsteady, but her head was held high. When she reached the table, Victor was still staring at her like he had seen a ghost. The $500 was still sitting there, but somehow it looked different now, smaller, less important. "Well," Maya said, her voice surprisingly steady, I believe you owe me $500. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it again without saying anything. For the first time all evening, the man who always had something to complain about was completely speechless. The applause finally began to die down, but the energy in the restaurant had completely changed. Maya could feel people still looking at her, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. A waitress who could play classical piano like a concert performer. A girl who had hidden such incredible talent behind a simple uniform and a friendly smile. Maya looked down at Victor Rothwell, this powerful man who had tried to humiliate her, and realized that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had walked to that piano 10 minutes ago. She might still be wearing the same uniform, might still need that tip money just as badly, but inside everything had changed. She had found herself again, and there was no going back. The applause seemed to last forever, but eventually it died down to scattered claps and amazed whispers throughout the restaurant. Maya stood beside Victor Rothwell's table, still feeling like she was floating somewhere outside of her own body. The transformation from invisible waitress to center of attention was so complete and sudden that she couldn't quite process it. Victor sat in stunned silence, his face having gone through several different expressions in the past few minutes. The smug confidence had melted away completely, replaced first by shock, then something that might have been embarrassment, and now what looked almost like genuine confusion. This was clearly not a man who found himself speechless very often. Victor started, then stopped. He reached for his water glass and took a long drink, as if buying time to figure out what to say. His business associates were staring at Maya with undisguised amazement, their important deals completely forgotten. The kind-faced man with gray hair was the first to break the silence. "That was extraordinary," he said softly, his voice full of genuine admiration. "I've been to Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, all the great concert venues. I have never heard anything more moving than what you just played." Maya felt her cheeks flush with warmth. "Thank you, sir. That's very kind of you to say." "Kind?" The man shook his head. "Young lady, I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. Where did you study? Juilliard? Curtis? You must have trained at one of the major conservatories." Before Maya could answer, another voice spoke up from across the restaurant. "Excuse me, may I approach?" Maya turned to see an elegant woman in her 60s walking toward them. She was impeccably dressed in a way that suggested both wealth and taste, with silver hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon. There was something about her bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. "I'm Dr. Catherine Wells," the woman said, extending her hand to Maya. "I was having dinner with my husband when you began to play. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I simply had to speak with you." Maya shook the offered hand, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Of course, ma'am. I'm Maya." Dr. Wells smiled warmly. "Maya, I want you to know that in my 40 years in the music industry, I have rarely encountered such raw talent and emotional depth in a performance. Your technique is flawless, but more than that, you have something that can't be taught. You have soul." Maya's eyes widened. "You work in the music industry?" "I'm a talent scout and producer," Dr. Wells explained. "I've worked with some of the biggest names in classical music. I discover and develop new artists." She paused, studying Maya's face carefully. "Tell me, what's your musical background? Where are you currently studying?" Maya felt her stomach drop. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that would reveal the gap between her talent and her circumstances. I'm not studying anywhere right now. I had to stop taking lessons a few years ago." "Stop taking lessons?" Dr. Wells looked genuinely shocked. "But someone with your level of skill must have years of formal training behind them." Maya glanced around the restaurant. Everyone was still listening, including Victor, who seemed to be slowly coming out of his shocked stupor. She took a deep breath and decided to tell the truth. "I stay. Artid playing when I was 5. My grandmother taught me on her old upright piano. When I was 12, she managed to get me into lessons with Mrs. Peterson at the community center. I studied with her for 6 years." Maya's voice grew quieter as she continued. "I was accepted into the music program at the state university, with a partial scholarship. But then my father left and my mother got sick." And she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Dr. Wells nodded with understanding, her eyes soft with compassion. "You had to choose between your dreams and your family," Dr. Wells said gently. "And you chose family." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. Victor Rothwell finally found his voice. "But you're just a waitress," he said. Though his tone lacked its earlier arrogance, he sounded more confused than cruel now, like he was trying to reconcile what he had just heard with his preconceived notions. Maya looked at him directly. "Yes, I'm a waitress. I work double shifts here 6 days a week to support my mother and my younger brother. My mother has diabetes and can't work anymore. My brother is a senior in high school hoping to get into college next year." She lifted her chin slightly. "But being a waitress doesn't mean I stopped being a musician. It just means I haven't had the luxury of pursuing it." Dr. Wells stepped closer to Maya. "How long has it been since you've played regularly?" "Almost 4 years," Maya admitted. "We had to sell our piano to pay for medical bills. Tonight was the first time I've touched a keyboard since then." A collective gasp went up from the people listening. Dr. Wells looked absolutely stunned. 4 years?" she repeated. "And you played with that level of technical precision and emotional expression after 4 years away from the instrument?" Maya shrugged, still not fully understanding what all the fuss was about. "Music isn't something you forget. It stays with you." Dr. Wells exchanged a meaningful look with her husband, who had approached during the conversation. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Maya," Dr. Wells said carefully, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If you had the opportunity to return to music to study and perform professionally, would you want that?" Maya's heart started racing. "Of course I would want that. But it's not possible. I can't afford—" "What if money weren't an issue?" Dr. Wells interrupted gently. "What if someone were willing to sponsor your education, cover your family's expenses while you studied?" Maya stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. That sounds too good to be true," Dr. Wells smiled. "Sometimes the most talented people are found in the most unexpected places. I've made a career out of recognizing exceptional talent, and Maya, what you have is beyond exceptional. With the right training and opportunities, you could be performing in the world's greatest concert halls within a few years." Victor Rothwell suddenly stood up from his chair. Everyone turned to look at him, wondering what he would say, now that his crude test had revealed something far beyond what anyone had expected. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice lacking all of its earlier arrogance. "What I did tonight was wrong. I tried to humiliate you for my own amusement, and instead, you've shown me something beautiful that I don't deserve to witness." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. $500 was insulting. What you just gave us was priceless. He began writing, his hand slightly shaky. When he finished, he tore out the check and handed it to Maya. Maya looked down at the check and gasped. "It was made out for $50,000, sir. I can't accept this," she said, trying to hand it back. "It's too much," Victor shook his head. "It's not enough. But it's a start. Use it for your family's medical bills, for your brother's education, for whatever you need." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm sorry, Maya. I'm sorry for how I treated you. And I'm sorry that someone with your talent has had to struggle the way you have." The restaurant had gone quiet again, everyone processing this unexpected turn of events. Maya looked from the check in her hands to Dr. Wells, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Wells said softly. "If you're willing, I'd like to arrange for you to audition for some of the best music programs in the country. Full scholarships, living expenses covered, everything you need to pursue your dreams without worrying about your family's financial security." Maya felt dizzy. An hour ago, she had been just another overworked waitress, invisible to most of the world. Now she was holding a check for more money than she had ever seen, with a respected music industry professional offering to change her entire life. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Dr. Wells reached out and gently squeezed Maya's hand. "Because talent like yours doesn't come along often. Because music needs voices like yours. And because everyone deserves the chance to share their gifts with the world." Tony appeared at Maya's side, his eyes red with tears of joy. "Mija," he said in his thick Brooklyn accent, "did you hear what the lady said? They want to help you become a real musician." Maya looked around the restaurant at all the faces turned toward her. Customers who had been strangers an hour ago were now smiling at her like she was family. The other servers were beaming with pride. Mr. Castellano was wiping his eyes with his apron, and in the middle of it all was Victor Rothwell, the man who had tried to break her spirit and instead had inadvertently helped her find her wings again. Maya folded the check carefully and put it in her apron pocket. Then she looked at Dr. Wells with determination in her eyes. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I want this chance. I want to make music again." The restaurant erupted in applause once more, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like a celebration of new beginnings. 6 months later, Maya stood in the wings of the Riverside Concert Hall, her hands steady as she adjusted the flowing black concert dress that Dr. Wells had insisted on buying for her. The sounds of the orchestra tuning their instruments drifted through the heavy curtain, mixing with the excited murmur of the sold-out crowd beyond. It felt like a dream, but the calluses on her fingertips from months of intensive practice were proof that this was very real. Every day since that night at Bellacino's had been a whirlwind of changes that she still couldn't quite believe. Dr. Wells had kept every promise she had made that evening. Within a week of their meeting, Maya had found herself auditioning for some of the most prestigious music programs in the country. The scholarship offers had come pouring in, each one more generous than the last. But it was Dr. Wells's personal mentorship program that had truly changed everything. The program covered not just Maya's education and living expenses, but her entire family's needs. Her mother's medical bills were paid in full, with a comprehensive health insurance policy that ensured she would never have to ration her medication again. Jake was enrolled in the best prep program in the city, with his college tuition already secured through a trust fund that Dr. Wells had established. "You can't make great art when you're worried about survival," Dr. Wells had explained when Maya had tried to protest the generosity. "Now you can focus entirely on becoming the musician you're meant to be." And Maya had thrown herself into that transformation with every ounce of energy she possessed. 8 hours of practice every day. Technique classes, music theory, performance coaching, master classes with visiting artists. Her fingers, which had been soft from years of carrying plates and wiping tables, had grown strong and sure again. Her musical instincts, dormant for so long, had awakened with a vengeance. Tonight was her debut recital, the culmination of 6 months of the most intensive musical training she had ever experienced. The concert hall was packed with music industry professionals, critics, and classical music lovers, all curious to hear the waitress-turned-pianist who had become something of a legend since videos of her impromptu restaurant performance had gone viral online. 5 minutes? Maya, the stage manager whispered as he passed by. Maya nodded and took a deep breath. She had learned to control her nerves over the past months, channeling them into her performance rather than letting them paralyze her. But tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't just playing for herself or even for her family. She was playing for everyone who had ever been overlooked, everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, everyone who had ever had to choose between their dreams and their responsibilities. "Maya?" A familiar voice called softly behind her. She turned to see Victor Rothwell approaching, looking almost nervous. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there was something different about him now. The arrogance that had defined him that night at the restaurant was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. Rothwell," Maya said, genuinely surprised to see him. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." Victor smiled sheepishly. "Dr. Wells invited me. I hope you don't mind. I know I don't deserve to be here after the way I treated you, but I wanted to see how your story turned out." Maya studied his face. Over the past 6 months, she had learned more about Victor Rothwell than she had ever expected to. The check he had written that night had been just the beginning. He had quietly donated $500,000 to Dr. Wells's mentorship program, funding scholarships for other talented musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. He had also endowed a music therapy program at the hospital, where Maya's mother received treatment. But perhaps most surprisingly, he had completely changed the way he treated service workers. Word had gotten around that the famously difficult Millionaire had become one of the most respectful and generous customers in the city. He learned servers' names, asked about their lives, and left tips that sometimes exceeded the cost of his meals. "I'm glad you're here," Maya said honestly. "In a strange way, none of this would have happened without you." Victor shook his head. "You always had this talent. I just happened to be the catalyst that revealed it. And Maya, I want you to know that watching your journey these past months has changed me more than you'll ever know." Before Maya could respond, Dr. Wells appeared at her side, radiant with excitement and pride. "Maya, darling, are you ready?" Dr. Wells had become like a second mother to her over the past months, guiding not just her musical development but her entire transition into a new life. The audience is absolutely electric with anticipation. Maya nodded, feeling that familiar surge of confidence that came just before she performed. "I'm ready," Dr. Wells squeezed her hand. "Remember, you're not just playing music tonight. You're telling your story, and it's a story that needs to be heard." The stage manager gave the final call, and Maya walked toward the curtain. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause was immediate and thunderous. The concert hall was indeed packed, every seat filled with people who had come to witness what many were calling a musical miracle. Maya took her place at the magnificent Steinway grand piano and waited for the applause to die down. In the front row, she could see her mother and Jake, both beaming with pride and joy. Jake was wearing his first tuxedo, and their mother looked healthier than she had in years, the stress lines around her eyes finally beginning to fade. Also in the front row, she spotted Tony from the restaurant, wearing his best suit and grinning like a proud father. Mr. Castellano was there too, along with several of her former co-workers who had become like family over the years, but it was the sight of a familiar upright piano in the wings that brought tears to her eyes. Dr. Wells had somehow tracked down and purchased Grandma Rosa's old piano, the one they had been forced to sell years ago. It now sat in Maya's practice studio, a reminder of where her journey had truly begun. "Good evening," Maya said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "6 months ago, I was a waitress at an Italian restaurant, working double shifts to support my family. Music was just a memory, something I had loved and lost. Tonight, I'm here because someone challenged me to play, and I found the courage to remember who I really was." She looked out at the audience, seeing faces that represented every part of her journey. "This program tonight is dedicated to everyone who has ever had to put their dreams on hold for the people they love, and to the belief that it's never too late to find your way back to what makes you whole." Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall, the same piece she had played that transformative night at the restaurant, but now with the full orchestral accompaniment behind her. As the music soared through the concert hall, Maya felt complete in a way she hadn't experienced since she was a child. Every note was perfect, every phrase filled with the depth of emotion that came from truly understanding what it meant to lose something precious and then find it again. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. This wasn't just a performance, it was a testament to the power of second chances, to the importance of seeing potential in unexpected places, to the belief that talent and dreams could survive even the most difficult circumstances. When the final notes rang out, the silence lasted for a breathless moment before the entire hall erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Maya stood at the piano, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. In the audience, Victor Rothwell was on his feet with everyone else, applauding with tears in his own eyes. The man who had once tried to humiliate a waitress for his own amusement now understood that he had witnessed something sacred that night at the restaurant. The moment when someone found their true self again. Dr. Wells had been right. This was just the beginning. Over the next year, Maya would perform with orchestras around the world, release her debut album to critical acclaim, and establish a foundation to help other talented musicians from underprivileged backgrounds pursue their dreams. But more than any of her professional achievements, Maya treasured the smaller victories. Her mother's health had stabilized, and she had been able to stop working to focus on her recovery. Jake had been accepted to 3 top universities and was planning to study music education, inspired by his sister's journey. The old piano at Bellacino's now had a small plaque beside it that read, "In honor of Maya Rodriguez," who reminded us that extraordinary talent can be found in the most ordinary places. The restaurant had become something of a pilgrimage site for music lovers, and Mr. Castellano had started hosting monthly performances by local musicians. As Maya took her final bow that night, she thought about all the people who had played a part in bringing her to this moment. Her grandmother, who had first put her hands on piano keys, her mother, who had sacrificed everything to keep their family together, Dr. Wells, who had seen potential where others saw only a waitress, even Victor Rothwell, whose cruel challenge had inadvertently set everything in motion. But mostly, she thought about the power of music itself to transform lives, to bridge gaps between people, to turn moments of humiliation into triumph. She had learned that talent alone wasn't enough. that circumstances could bury even the greatest gifts, but that sometimes when you least expect it, the universe conspires to give you exactly the chance you need. As she walked off the stage to thunderous applause, Maya smiled at the thought that somewhere in the city, there might be another young person serving tables or stocking shelves or doing whatever they needed to do to survive, carrying within them a gift that the world desperately needed to hear. Her story was proof that it was never too late to become who you were always meant to be, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. The girl who had been invisible for so long had finally found her voice, and the world was listening.